Hello and welcome to today's class on parsha Tzav 5782. It is a class that is not filmed in front of a live studio audience, and I'm not sure it's going to last an entire hour. We'll see what we can do. I thought it's important to have parsha so people will know that there is a parsha this week too after Purim. And anyway, this is a time for Torah. This is a time to learn. We say Hayadim Haita Ora V'Simcha V'Sason. And we say it in Havdalah, and the Gemara tells us what's Ora, what's this Ora that the Jewish people had at the time of Purim? Ora is Torah, Zora Zu Torah. So it's an important time to learn, not to neglect that, a very important mitzvah. And let's get right into Parshat Tzav then. Parshat Tzav begins as a continuation of last week's parsha. We'll see that there's some differences, but it also talks about the rules of the sacrifices, and then. Strangely enough, now that we know everything that we need to know about sacrifices, supposedly, it switches right into the miluyim, which is the inauguration of the kohanim when they were about to actually perform their duty. They had to be inaugurated into the office, and basically the second half of the parsha deals with that. So let's go into a deep dive into the parsha. Let's look at some of the verses. But before we do that, let's look at something from the Mora, from Nechama Leibowitz, who writes about what she calls, or was translated into English as the taxonomy of sacrifice. The wording, the language, the nomenclature, the actual distinguishing of the different sacrifices is what she's going to focus on. She says, if we compare the opening verses of this week's Sidra with those of the previous one, we shall immediately realize why the Torah refers again to the various types of sacrifices, but this time with a difference. So if you compare the beginning of last week's parsha to the beginning of this week's parsha, Deber el bnei Yisrael ve'amart alehem, speak to whom? To the children of Israel, and say to them, versus this week's parsha, which again, beginning of Tzav, says Tzav et Aaron vet banav lemor, command Aaron and his sons. It's a completely different subject, right? We're not talking to the children of Israel, we're talking to Aaron specifically. The details of the service and sacrifices are repeated in our Sidra for the benefit of the priests, of the Aaron and his sons. So that's why the whole Parsha is focused on that, and why it's a little bit different from last week's Parsha, which was focused on the Jewish people themselves, the ones who did not actually perform the sacrifices, right? You know, they were being told about how it's done in Vayikra, and in Tzav, they're being told how to do it, because these are the kohanim who are actually going to do it. So she has a little chart here, comparison between some of the sacrifices mentioned in Vayikra and their cognate, their opposite here in Tzav, and where they are placed and how they are placed is related to that. The variation in order, she writes, is determined, as pointed out above, by the category of persons to whom the observances were addressed. Where the Torah addresses the Israelites, the Jews, those who brought and contributed the sacrifices, precedence is given to those which can constitute voluntary offerings, such as the olah, mincha, shlamim, and afterwards come the obligatory offerings, such as the sin and guilt offerings, which have to be brought only on the appropriate occasions. On the other hand, when the Torah addresses the priests, the order is in accordance with the grades of holiness attached to the offerings. First, the holiest, the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Olah, Mincha, Hatat, Asham, and afterwards those of lesser, what's called lighter sanctity, the Kodshim Kalim, such as the Shlamim, since it is the duty of the priest to be conversant with the ritual details and varying sanctities of the various offerings. However, our ancient sages in the Midrash were not satisfied with explanations based purely on considerations of logical order and arrangement, especially since such considerations cannot always be discovered underlying the literary arrangement of material in the Torah. Okay, that's very nice. This makes logical sense that we'd go with, in this particular order now that we're talking to the priests. So the holiness of the sacrifices is what comes first. That's not always what happens in the Torah. So there might be some other deeper meaning, and that's what we're going to discover now. They preferred to find connecting links between the various juxtaposed passages by reference to verbal association from which a moral lesson could be learned. Let us quote here the words of the sages in the Midrash, this is in the Tanchuma, on the subject of the connection between the opening passage of the Sidra and the immediately preceding one with which the previous Sidra of Vayikra concludes. So Tanchuma, it says, Tzav et Aaron, and then it said, it also said, Zot Torat Olah. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Kaimu ma shekatuv l'mala min le'inyan achar kach Zot Torat Olah. So the Hashem is saying, observe. I'm going to try to just read her translation here, or the translation of her translation. Observe that which is written in the passage immediately preceding, and after that, this is the law of the olah. So do what was just written, and then you can talk about the olah. Lama, how's that work? And then it quotes a verse from Isaiah 61:8. It says, Ki ani Hashem ohev mishpat. I am Hashem who loves justice. Sona gazal be'avla. And I hate robbery. I hate this disgusting violence and robbery. So that's what it says. But avla, which is this violence, has the exact same letters as olah, which is the kind of offering. So afilu ba'olah, in other words, makati lemala min ha'inyan. What does it say before the last verse in Vayikra? It said, "Vayash ki yechtav Hashem heshiv et hagazla asher gazal ve'achar kach zot Torah ha'olah." So because it's written there also, first it talks about robbery, and then it talks about the olah. The lesson here is that when does Hashem want our offerings? When does He want our olah, our holy offerings? When our hands are clean, when we haven't stolen anything, when everything is all of the materials used for the korban is kosher money. And then the Midrash quotes a verse from Tehillim 24, where it says, "Who shall ascend the mount of Hashem? Who shall stand in His holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart." That's in Tanchuma. So, writes Nechama Leibowitz, by means of the verse from Isaiah, "For I, the Lord, love justice, judgment, and hate robbery from burnt offerings." So again, the olah, avla, right, connection. So we're translating it as burnt offerings, not as violence. The Midrash illuminates the connection between the passage on the burnt offering, with which the Sidra begins, and the previous passage dealing with the guilt offering for robbery. Although a number of commentaries, including the Targum Yonatan, etc., just quote some others, who consider Ba'olah to be a shortened form of avla, meaning iniquity, like we said, violence, etc. After it's similarly, that's how it's used. That's how avla is used in Eov 5:16. Nevertheless, many classic commentators, including Rashi, Ibn Ezra, Kimchi, Lutzato, and by that he does not mean the Ramchal, but his, I believe, another relative of his, follow the Midrash, deriving it from olah, a burnt offering. The King James version, which is what she quoted above, also calls it burnt offering. However, the Midrash does not explain the verse as constituting a warning against sacrificing an unfit offering, as in Malachi, and you bring that which hath been robbed, at the beginning of Malachi. But rather, the person bringing the offering is unfit to do so, so long as he is tainted in some way by dishonest dealings. In other words, we're not saying don't bring stolen things. It's saying you don't be a stealing type of person if you want to bring an offering. It's talking about the person bringing the offering. The person bringing the offering needs to have clean hands. That's one of the central concepts of the prophetic messages recurring in the pages of Isaiah, Hosea, Amos, Yirmiyahu, that sacrifices unaccompanied by good deeds and pure intentions are worthless, underlies the connection between the two Sidrot, Vayikra and Tzav, which contain the principal sacrificial laws. That whole concept, I don't want your sacrifices if you're not doing it correctly. That concept needs to be underlying all of this discussion about sacrifices. We're talking about how to do a sacrifice. Part of how to do a sacrifice, or korban, or whatever you want to call it, part of doing that is being somebody who has clean hands. That has to be central to this. So on that topic, she brings up the taking of the ashes, the Trumat HaDeshen, which is going to be discussed in the very, very next verse. And she quotes the Sefer HaChinuch describing it, but then she's much more satisfied with what it says later in Rabbeinu, not Rabbeinu Bachya, in Rabbeinu Bachya and Chovat HaLevavot. So it says there, why do we have this mitzvah of cleaning out the ashes? That the Kohen should belittle his own work in his own eyes, that he should thunder at his soul for its incapacity in spiritual matters before God and man, seeking help and courage from him, leaving haughtiness to the Creator, forsaking greatness and honor whenever he performeth for God, whether in private or public, as is written regarding Aaron concerning the loftiness of his station. He shall put off his linen garment, put on other garments, carry forth the ashes without, and others outside, in order to humble and remove the haughtiness from his heart. A similar humbling is implied in the description of David in 2 Samuel chapter 6, as seen through the eyes of Michal, and she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord. Rav Hirsch, 19th century champion of Orthodox Judaism in Germany, goes into direct detail on the subject. It is our daily duty to bring to our observance of the mitzvot a new zest, as if each time it were the first occasion we were performing the rite. That which we have performed in the past, we are not free from performing again and again with the same joy. And he shall carry forth the ashes. That's just carrying the ashes. The relics of the previous day's work need clearing away before the new day's work can be begun in a clean and renovated place. This explains the importance of the warning to perform the removal of the ashes, a symbol for the occupation with the previous day's work, a worn out and old clothes. One must not don the smartest clothes and the nicest clothes in honor of something performed in the past. That is thrust aside before the fresh mitzvah that each day bids us observe. In other words, what we're saying is all of the mitzvot that we have, all of the korbanot that we're going to be describing now, they have a moral lesson within them. And part of the moral lesson underlying all of it is that we need to have a clean heart. We need to have pure motivation. We need to not be doing things for ourselves. We need to have the humility to realize that we are working for a much, much bigger boss. Okay? So that's just the beginning. That's just to understand really understand the whole, the core of what we're talking about here. All right, so let's talk about that first verse again. Tzav et Aaron vet banav lemor. Command Aaron and his son, saying, Zot Torah ha'olah, hi ha'olah al mokta al mizbeach kol alayla ad haboker veisha mizbeach tukad bo. Moshe is supposed to command Aaron, and he's going to tell him, this is the whole olah, the burnt offering. It's called olah because it's aliyah. It goes up. It goes all the way up. Nothing is left over. The burnt offering itself shall remain where it is burnt upon the altar all night until morning, while the fire on the altar is kept going on it. So all night long, the fire is going, it's burning, it's burning, it's burning. And eventually what happens to something that's burning, burning, and burning, it becomes ash. And that brings us to the next verse, which we're not talking about quite yet. However, what we will talk about is the famous discussion we had. We mentioned it in last year's class as well. It's definitely worthy of review. And we had some commentaries explaining this. But the famous question of why do we have to tzav at Aaron? Why do we have to command him and his sons? In other words, it seems like it's an unusual phrase, and it seems to be implying that he needs some extra encouragement. He needs a little push. Tell him to do this. He's got to do this right. What's going on? What's the stress? So as most commentaries, The Orach Chaim is bothered by this as well, and he quotes the midrash that Rashi brings as well from Torat Kohanim. Ein tzav eleziruz miyad uledorot. So when it's using the word tzav, command, it's to encourage, so it gives zrizut to give them, like I said, a little kick to make sure that it's done for immediately and for all generations. And he continues to quote Rabbi Shimon, Amar Rabbi Shimon, Biyoter kol makom sheyesh chesron kis ad kan. So ad kan is the rest of the end of the quote. So it's in particular, you need a little bit of a kick, a little bit of a push when it comes to chisron kis, which is usually translated as chisron means a lack, and kis is a pocket or a wallet or a purse. So when you have to spend some money, or when you're going to lose out something financially, that's called chisron kis. So in some sense, Aaron and his sons, because the olah is completely burnt up, this is how we usually understand it, so Rashi understands it, because the olah is completely burnt up and the kohanim get really nothing out of it. They don't get to eat the meat. Therefore, they need a little bit of a push so that they'll do it completely anyway. Okay, so so here, according to Tanakama, which is the author of the original author being quoted, it said because it needs an extra ziruz, it needs a little extra push. Letzad ma shegadlu parte dine ha'olah b'layla, because of all the details that apply to the olah at night, which is going to be discussed, obviously, the rest of the parsha. Masha ein mishpat dome lach b'chol hakorbanot. So because this is different than other korbanot, that's why they need a little extra push. It has some more extra laws, etc., etc. Yeah, but then his real issue then has more to do with what Rav Shimon says. Let's skip down to that. V'chisron kish omer Rav Shimon, Rabbo bo pirushim. The explanation, there's a lot of different explanations for this, just, as we mentioned. Yesh omrim alav dafka chisron kish, could be that it's not literally a loss of money. Elohu hadin ribuy hatzar. It means just that they were pained. It was a difficult avoda. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of effort, and so maybe that's what it means that they needed a little push because it was going to be a difficult job to do. V'yesh omrim, and others say, and here he's quoting the first part. He was quoting Mizrahi. Others say yesh omrim ki haya batel. Maybe because I have to work on it all night, I have to keep the fire going. Maybe that's the extra effort, and that's what is the loss of money. And others say, the levush among them, that the loss of money is referring to the Jew who has to bring a private olah. Why? Because all the parts of the olah are burnt up, and they do not derive any benefit from those parts. In other words, the meat. V'yesh omrim, and there's another opinion, right? He's going to go through a few opinions. There's another opinion that yesh omrim chesron ki is lakohen. It's a loss of money for the kohen. Why? Shehu yirtza lahakri b'korbanot acherim sheyesh lo zchut b'hem, because he'd rather bring other offerings that he actually gets something from. Right, he gets to eat from the sin offering, etc. So he doesn't get to get anything out of this one. Masha engin ha'olah shekula b'leil ein lo ba ela or. From the olah, all he gets is the skin. He doesn't like any of these answers. All of these are stretch for me, he says. Rechok. They're not the right answer. By the way, this is not the entire perush. It's not his entire comment, but this is just he goes on for quite a bit. But let me give you the basic understanding of how the Or HaChaim understands this chisron kis, this lack that the kohanim will have, that they need an extra push. V'ulai nira, it seems, shehu al hat madat eitzim, but it also makes sense to say that maybe he's referring to the constantly burning wood, right? The wood is constantly being burned for the fire, so to make the stuff into ash. Shamru Chazal, the rabbis say shalosh marachot shel eish hayusham. The rabbis tell us, this is in the Gemara in Yuma, that there were three pyres. There were three piles of wood that on which these things burnt. And in order to make sure that there would be a permanent fire going, as the verse tells us, has to be in Eish Tamid. Adkan, and that's the end of the quote. Al prat zeh amar chisron kis, and that's why it says chisron kis, this loss of money. Perush de lelo davar. This is what it means is that this money is being spent to keep the fire going for really seemingly no real benefit, no real reason. You're just burning gas here, or in this case, burning fire. She'ein bo echad miha korbanot. None of them actually have. There's no offering being brought on it overnight. There's no offerings at night. The fire is eating up the wood all night long. And that too, believe it or not, wood also costs money. And this is I know it's not sure how to account for inflation and everything, but the wood was not as easy to get, and it was not as cheap as you might imagine. So maybe that's what it means. And then he gives another suggestion, and this is really the one I wanted to focus on. V'od nira ki chesun kisu letzad shemitzvot olah tamid asaba haktuv devar gadol. Oh, it can also be that this chisron kis that Reb Shimon had talked about is from the fact that when it comes to bringing the olah, the tamid, the Torah instituted, it established a very important requirement that would cost a lot of money. And what's that? The Ktiv, as it says in the verse 5, that the Kohen is supposed to light up the wood every morning and prepare the olah offering on it. The rabbi said to Torah kohanim, the rabbis said in the Braita in Torah kohanim, also Torah kohanim, which was what we quoted from. From where do we know that nothing can come before the morning tamid? Tamid lomar aleha ha'olah. The Torah said the Kohen shall light this olah upon it. In other words, the olah has to be on it, on the tamid. That means the tamid has to come first. Adkan, that's the rest of the quote. It's the end of the quote. V'tanya, and what we learn from this, but Tosefta, the Pesachim, it says in Pesachim, that Tosefta writes in Pesachim, al hakadoshim shehi krivan an kodem l'tamid shel shachar psulim. The Tosefta there says that any offering that's brought before the tamid is pasul, is nothing. You didn't do any mitzvah. It's a waste. By the way, there's an argument whether this is from the Torah. We find this is the halakha, but there's a question if it's from the rabbis or from the Torah. There are differences of opinion. The Or HaChaim's opinion, by the way, is quite clearly that it is indeed a Torah level observance, a Torah level psul. So that would mean that as we'll see, that there's going to be relevance in halakha to that, at least in the halakha of korbanot. So, in other words, im ein olah, if you didn't bring an olah yet, kol she'asa kodem la pasul. Anything that you brought beforehand is pasul. Umizeh Yishtalshulu dvarim rabim sheyesh bahem chisun kis. And that way, what you're going to end up having is a lot of loss of money. It's not the Kohen is worried that he's going to lose money, so he needs an extra push. He needs an extra push because other people will lose money. All the people who brought their korbanot, they brought them and brought them and brought them, and the Kohen is going left and right and doing this korban and that korban and this korban and that korban, and over and over and over again. And then he goes, oi, 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 it's 9 o'clock a.m. and I haven't brought the tamid yet. And if I haven't brought the tamid, every single thing I brought before the tamid is pasul. So all of those korbanot that I just did are worthless. And everybody who brought them would have lost all that money. The Kohen has to care about that Chison Kis. I think that's a beautiful idea. He's in the moment, you know? He's on a spiritual high. And even then, he has to be thinking about, I have to make sure that I'm doing this right. I have to be zaris. I have to do this correctly because I don't want anyone to lose out money. And all of those korbanot that could have been brought, even one korban that could have been brought before the tamid would have been a waste, would have been pasul. So because of that, when it comes to the korban olah, it's important that they know ahead of time that when to do it, and it might have to be very zaris about that. So in a relatively recent book published from Art Scroll called Rav Chaim Kanievsky on Chumash, Vayikra, it quotes Rav Chaim Kanievsky commenting on this. So first of all, right, of course, as we just said, the Or Chaim cites it Tosefta that teaches that any offering brought prior to the morning tamid is invalidated. We said that. Since we know that the last tamid offering, so this is now going to be sort of an interesting question about that. We know this because of the Gemara in Tani 26b, that the last tamid offering before the destruction of the temple was brought on the 16th of Tammuz. That's one of the things we commemorate on the 17th of Tammuz, the fast day then. How can it be, if that's true, which it is, how can it be that the kohanim and Leviim were standing and performing the temple service on the morning of Tisha B'Av, as we say they did, 3 weeks later, as described in the Gemara in Arachim 11b? Didn't we say that any offering before the tamid is not valid, is pasul? Wouldn't any offering at that point have been invalidated? So for 3 weeks straight, they were just doing invalidated offerings. You can't bring a known invalid offering from beforehand. So says Rav Chaim that the invalidation of any offering brought prior to the offering, the tamid, is rabbinic in nature, not like what the Or Chaim suggests, right? But in his answer, like I said, there are differences of opinion. But Rav Chaim is saying that, in accordance with Tosfot, by the way, Menachot 49b, that this is a rabbinic psul, not a Torah level psul. As such, it would apply only when the bringing of the tamid remains a viable possibility. Remember, that's one of the differences between rabbinic law and Torah law. A Torah law is forever, is always. Rabbinic law sometimes has, some variance depending on situations. If they were awaiting for example, if they were awaiting the arrival of a sheep that could be brought for the tamid, and someone brought another korban first, that offering would be pasul. In a case where they were certain that the tamid would not be brought, such as prior to the destruction of the temple, when no sheep or goats who could be found for that purpose, they would not have been precluded from bringing other offerings. So they were allowed to bring offerings, according to Rav Chaim and Tosfot and others. They would indeed have been allowed to bring other offerings before the olah if they did not have something to bring for the olah. Okay. So let's go on from there to the next verse. Okay, next verse is, as we said before, is about the Trumat HaDeshen. Okay, V'lavash HaKohen midovad v'chnesevad yalbash al b'soro. The Kohen has to get dressed in linen clothing, linen pants, his body, right? Al Basoro, Behirim et Hadesh, he's supposed to take the ashes, Asher Tochal Ha'esh, that the fire has eaten up, et Olah, from the olah, right? The fire ate up the olah, made it into ash. Al HaMizbeach v'Samo, Eitzel HaMizbeach. And he's supposed to place it, he's supposed to pick it up, he's supposed to clean off the grill, right? Clean off the Mizbeach, the altar. He's supposed to throw the ashes beside the altar. All right. Writes Rav Moshe Sternbach in Tam V'dat. No, it's not right there. Yeah. So he quotes also the Chovat HaLevavot, just like we said previously from Nechama Leibowitz, that the purpose of this mitzvah, Yesod mitzvot hadeshin b'chol yom sheshel legidel malat hakohen chayevo habore v'shafal v'hisir hagvod melibos. So b'shat ha'osek kavod b'oro. So at the time that he is honoring Hashem, the Kohen's own honor will be somewhat diminished, which is okay. We have to sort of humble ourselves. That's kind of the idea. That's really the idea of this mitzvah, that humility is an important thing. It is one of the things that lack of humility can definitely lead to some of the worst sins we have. So we want to avoid that. So then he quotes that the Rambam, in the end of Hilchot Me'ilah, Sof Hilchot Me'ilah, Shapiri Sham Ba'ure Kama Chamura Torah Me'ilah. Chamura. Okay. See how strict the Torah is with regard to Me'ilah. Ma im eitzim avanim afar ve'efer kevan shenikra sham Shem Adon Olam Alehem b'dvarim bilvad v'gdash al hanoheg behen minhag chol me'al ba v'afilo haya shogeg tzarech kapara. Wow. See how strict the Torah is when it comes to Me'ilah, which is using, Me'ilah is this a sin of misusing sacred property for your own purpose. So he says, if wood and stone, ashes, dirt, once the name of the master of the world, Rabbonu Shel Olam, is placed upon them, it makes it holy. And what does that mean? So somebody who misuses it, even by accident, needs kapara. So kol v'chomer, all the more so, l'mitzvah shechakik lanu HaKadosh Baruch Hu, shelo yivat ha'ada b'hem mipnei shelo yadat taman. So all the more so with other mitzvot that Hashem commanded us clearly. Pardon me. So all the more so those mitzvot that if we mistreat them, we're mistreating. What are we mistreating when we do the Me'ilah with these things? We're mistreating ash, right? We're not. It's not. You think it's not the most important thing in the world. So mitzvah that Hashem wrote to us, don't reject the mitzvah because you don't know its reason, right? Or give, it says, other data or other reasons for Hashem's motivation, quote unquote. Don't think of mitzvot in that way that he thinks of common matters. That's the end of the quote from the Rambam. I am sure Devarim Betukim Ein Kotzer Datanu, right? So comments Rav Sternbach. Do you realize how little we understand about mitzvah? The king of the world made these mitzvot. And that's where they get their kedusha. They don't get their holiness because we want them to be holy. They get their holiness because Hashem commanded us to do a mitzvah with them. Even ash, shekvar einu shava leklum. It's not equal to anything. You can't sell ash. I don't see too many ash salesmen walking around, right? Kodeshu, it's holy. This ash is holy. Umayilimbo, you can, God forbid, do meila with it. You can have a holy misuse of ash. Lefi shakadosh mitzvot Hashem. That's how holy the mitzvot are. V'ayin heitev b'lashono hamazukak shel Rambam. Look very carefully at Rambam's very, very strong language here. He says you can learn a lot from the Rambam. Take your time, learn this well, because it's a very important lesson. Mitzvot are very, very precious to Hashem. You could do me'ilah with ash, right? This ash, which is nothing, becomes more than something. It becomes extra credit ash if you're doing a mitzvah with it, and then misusing it now that it's become holy is a very big sin. All right, let's keep going. I think we have time for one more comment, and then I don't even know how long this class has been so far, but that's okay. If it hasn't been an hour, so if you want an hour worth of Torah, listen to it a couple of times. I don't know. Either way, this is a great thing to do while you're doing other mitzvot of Purim. Maybe you're packing mishloach manot, maybe you're shopping, maybe you're going out and giving tzedakah to people, preparing your suda, whatever you're doing. If you're learning some Torah at the time, it's a beautiful thing. And if this isn't if this is parsha Tzav in another year when it's not Purim time, it's Pesach time, I'm sure there's other mitzvot you can think of. At least you can say, this year's class, I didn't at least have to change location in the middle of the class to my car, like last year. So that's already it's already a benefit to today's class. Let's look at one more verse all the way towards the end of the parsha. Pasuk Yud Gimel. It says V'ikarev Moshe et bnei Aaron. So this is during the inauguration, as we said before. Moshe brought together the sons of Aaron. V'yalbishem kutanot. He put on them the tunics. V'yakor otam avneit. He wrapped them up in their belts and their sashes. V'yachshov lahem mikbaot kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe. And then he got them dressed. He put on their headgear, their turban, whatever you want to call it, just as Hashem commanded Moshe. So far, so good. Asks the Meshech Chochmah, a very short comment really from the Meshech Chochmah. It says, V'yachgor otam avneit. He put a belt on them. Now, this is very strange. He didn't put a belt on them and turbans on them. It's not a belt that he put on them. He put belts on them and turbans on them. They are plural. There are multiple sons of Aaron, right? And they're all being dressed up in the clothing of the kohanim. So they're not. Moshe isn't taking one belt and wrapping it all around all of them. What's going on? Says the Meshech Chochmah, b'kol makom k'tiv avnei lashon yachid levad b'parsha Tetzaveh k'tiv v'asiyat lahem avneitim. So it's very interesting when it comes to the avneit, this belt. It always talks about it in the singular throughout the Torah, with one exception, and that's when they're actually being made in parsha Tetzaveh, where it says, "Make for them avneitim, make for them sashes, make for them these belts." Why? Why is it always singular? Okay, we understand why the plural, why that one exception is the plural, is that's when they're making for all of them. They're making all the belts for all of them. But why couldn't it say in this pasuk? I'll strengthen the question a little bit. V'yakriv Moshe b'nei Aaron v'yalbishem ketunot V'yachgor otam avnetim, perfectly fine. He put on them the belts, right? He put belts on them. He wrapped them in sashes, however you want to say it. Let's see how they translate it in Safari. So yeah, they don't bring up this problem in the translation, right? Moses then brought Aaron's sons forward, clothed them in tunics, and it girded them with sashes. It's plural. Avnate is singular. It's not avnetim. So interesting question. So it says the Meshech Chochmah, maybe this is bringing up what it says in the Rambam in Hilchot Klei HaMikdash 8:19. Rambam says the Avnei Haya Orech Lamed Bet V'Rachbo Gam Kigimel Etzbaot. So the belt was 32 amot long. 32 amot long at 64 feet. That's quite a belt, right? The sash had to be wrapped around and wrapped around and wrapped around a lot of times until, I'm assuming the kohanim were of good health. They certainly had to be to do the service. They had to run around a lot and do a lot of work. So either way, and they couldn't have the fingers had to be the proper measurement for the kmitza. So I'm not going to get into all that right now. But either way, the avnate was 32. It was very, very long. All of them were 32 amot long. And what does that tell you? That means haya mida achat lekol ha'avnetim. Each one of the avnetim, each one of these sashes had a uniform size. They were all the same size. Aval hamikbaot, but the turbans, each one had an individual size based on the coin and the size of his head. He had a hat size. So people go shopping for hats, and there's different sizes. There's 48 and 3/8, and there's 48 and 4/8, and so there's depending on the size of a person's head, it makes a difference, and the hat won't fit right if it's not exactly, except for that scene in an American Tail when Fievel Mouskowitz gets his father's hat and droops over his ears, right? So don't worry, you'll grow into it. So that's not what you want from your coin. Your coin comes out and his turban's like over his face. It needs to fit right. But that's not the only message here. There's very, very important messages. There's certain things that have to be individualized. Certain parts of our avoda to Hashem are individualized, and some things are uniform. Some things you have to do by the book. You have to follow, just like the korban had to be done a certain way. The ashes had to be removed in a certain order. The olah had to be brought first. Everything else is pasul. The same thing with our avoda. We have certain things we have to do that are uniform. We have to pray 3 times a day. Well, I want to pray only 1 time a day, but put a lot of emphasis on that one. No, you can't just make up your own minds about how many times you pray, unless unless you're a woman, et cetera. But if you're a Jewish man, you have an obligation to pray 3 times a day. Sometimes 4 times a day, sometimes 5 times a day. Either way, it's uniform, and you have to follow the siddur. Yes, there are parts of the siddur that you can, and we talked about this before in Shemona Esrei, you should individualize. You should have your own wording at certain points, but that does not change Chazal's formulation. You still go with your traditional reading, but there are parts and there are points where you can stop and say your own prayer, hopefully relevant to the prayer you're in the middle of, and then continue with the words of Chazal, who knew Hebrew better and who knew the power of tefillah much better, had a real sense of what each word meant. As we've said before, think of tefillah of the siddur as an envelope that will get to Hashem. Your own prayers that come from your heart are the letter that get into the envelope, that get to Hashem. So you want that envelope, and you want it to be written correctly. For those of you who remember mail, right? If you mistype an email address, it won't get to where you want it to go. It doesn't matter if you put the wrong, if you put Gmail instead of Outlook or AOL or whatever it is, Yahoo. Then what you've done is you've sent it to a different person, if anybody at all. And so that envelope needs to be done correctly. That's the siddur. That's what's written down. That's the kavu. That's the keva. But what you put from your heart, you need to put that too. You need to actually have, content in your email that you're sending, and that needs to be there as well. And that's kind of some of the symbolism that we're seeing from really all of the Torah we've learned today, from Nechama Leibowitz, and how we need to have a clear heart. The person who brings the korban needs to have the proper thoughts, etc., and all the way through with how the Kohen has to care about what's going on with the loss of money and the loss of time that the people are experiencing, and how the Kohen has to work and make sure that does not occur. And also the comment from Rav Sternbach about how important it is to really respect and understand how precious mitzvot are. If the ashes can be misused, then how much more so a real mitzvah, not real, but a mitzvah object that's designed as a mitzvah object, tefillin, tzitzit, a Shabbat table, a kiddush cup, candles, candlesticks. There are a lot of items we have that were made for mitzvot, and those things should not be misused, because we have to remember that these are mitzvot from Hashem, and the better we do them, the closer we will be to Him. And I wish everybody a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.